All right. So our topic tonight is queens, being the queen, and looking at some Tanakh, scriptural examples, different women in our history who all, in very different ways, were very pivotal queens. So what does it mean to be a queen? Every one of us is a queen. What's a queen? The function of a queen is to support the king, which sounds like to be a wife, right? Every queen supports the king. Every queen gives the queen the strength to be, every queen gives the king the strength to be king. And that's like every wife gives the strength to her husband to be the man he's supposed to be. So why did I call us queens? I could just call us women, wives, and that's in essence the same point. But I use the word queen. I was thinking of the idea tonight as a queen because the queen is really expressing how we express ourselves to the world, how we hold ourselves. The Lubavitcher Rebbe's wife, who's referred to as Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka, she once went to comfort a mourner, what we call Menachem Avel, to go to a Shiva house and to pay a visit to the woman who was a relative of hers who had just lost a relative. When she came into the home of this woman, she wasn't there. Sometimes happens when you are in that state, you leave for a few minutes or longer. So the woman had stepped out for whatever reason. She was on a phone call, went to eat, took a nap, I don't know. But the woman wasn't there. So Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka sat for a few minutes, be polite. She's like, oh, she's not there, bye. Sat for a few minutes, didn't know anyone in the room. No one in the room knew her. And then after a few minutes, she left. Shortly after which, the woman who was sitting Shiva came back into the room. And they said to her, oh, you had a visitor, but she left. So she said, what's her name? We don't know. We never saw her before. Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka was very, very, very private, and most people had no clue what she looked like. We never saw her before. Okay, you get a visitor. They said, but no, she was very special. We don't know who she was, but we know she was royalty. And then after a few minutes of questioning to get more information, the woman who knew what Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka looked like understood who her visitor was. But the other people had no clue. They didn't know she was Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka, the wife of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. They didn't know who she was. She didn't say her name. But when they were looking at her, just sitting in the room, they knew she was royalty. And now, of course, that takes a lot of work. That takes years of training, breathing to be natural royalty, that you walk into a room and nobody knows your name, but everyone knows you're royal. Though they don't see the crown on your head, they get it from your energy. But all of us innately are royalty. That is truly the definition of every Jewish woman, that we are innately royalty. Each one of us should view ourselves as the only child of God, the ultimate king. So that means when I'm saying I'm royalty, it's not just like a fake out. It's actually a true statement. And if I understand my role in that way, if I look at myself that way, I demand something very subconscious. It's not always a lot of proactive work. It's more a subconscious state of being that affects how I view myself, how I view the world around me, how I interact with the world around me. The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, said that every single Jew is the only child, so to speak, of God. Just as if parents waited their entire life, hoped, prayed, waited, hoped, maybe despaired a little, and at the end of their life, in their old age, they were given a child. That's me to God. That's every single one of us to God. That's how we're viewed, as the only child. As the verse says, my son, my firstborn, is the Jewish people. Each one of us is like God's only child. The Talmud said, why was man created single? Meaning first we had man, Adam, and then was formed the woman, Eve, Chava. Every other species was formed twos. Only man was first one. I was like, God didn't realize his partner. So why was he formed as a single Adam and only later Chava, Eve? And the answer the Talmud gives is, so every one of us should know we are the entire world. There's a phrase the Talmud uses, a very powerful phrase, Bishvili Nivra Ha'olam, which means, for my sake, the world was created. Every single one of us should view ourselves as the purpose of creation. For my sake, the world was created. So my premise is, the way I look at myself, and of course the way I look at others, we're just now having to talk about how we look at ourselves. If the way I look at myself is I'm the only child of the ultimate king, of the king of all kings, of God, that means I have very illustrious lineage. I have great protection. I have great connections. I'm connected to the ultimate power. I'm very important. I'm God's only child. Which means everything in the world, in a sense, is revolving around me. And that's true. For each one of us, everything in the world revolves around us. To me, the simplest example of this, I know we've mentioned this before, which means just the most obvious example is if I'm stuck in a traffic jam, I think, okay, all these people around you, all these thousands of people are stuck because I'm supposed to be late. I probably am late. I'm supposed to be later. And if the lights are all green, I'm like, all right, everyone's going on my coattails. Everyone's going to get there earlier because I'm supposed to be early, or in my case, on time. And that's why all the lights are green. Now, that could be like, what? I mean, the lights are green, or there's a traffic jam. No. For my sake, the world was created. That's a literal truth. It's a statement of the Talmud. God did something different. He didn't create Adam and Eve like he created every other species. He created just Adam. It's not that two people should think the world is created for the two of them. One person, only one person, because each one of us is that Adam. Each one of us has to understand that from my perspective, in God's relationship to me, I'm the only child. I'm the purpose of this entire creation. Everything that's happening, whatever happening politically in Israel or in America, what's going on in downtown Chicago or down my block, it's all revolving around me and my journey in this world. And that's true for every single one of us. It's a godly truth. So why am I going into this? I mean, we might know this. We might have touched on this before. I know we have. Why am I going into this? Because I'm looking in terms of the attitude it should engender. The attitude being accountability, royalty, responsibility. God's doing all this for me. I'm his only child. I'm the purpose of creation. That means God really wants something from me, or God really needs something from me. So the whole world is functioning with all of its 8 billion people. For me, what am I doing about it? And it's like, am I turning over in bed for a few more minutes to sleep? Am I counting down the minutes so my kids are in bed and my life can begin? What am I doing with the day of this whole world that God has created for me? So in terms of my self-image, I want to cultivate this inner reality, this inner truth, my covert truth, that this is it. I'm the child of the king. It might be unknown. Maybe nobody out there knows it and appreciates me as such. But maybe it will be apparent by my behaviors. Maybe the way I act, people can get a little inkling of the royalty. Why do I need to show people that I'm royal? It's like, hey, by the way, I want you to know how special I am. It should just flow naturally. And people should feel the specialness from each one of us. By Mashiach, when we have the ultimate redemption, it's going to be apparent to all. Because it says that then all evil, all negativity will be removed. The verse says, "Es ruach hatumah a'avir min ha'aretz." The spirit of impurity, I, God, will remove from the world. So all of our junk is going to be gone. All of our masquerade, all of the layers we wear that aren't exactly queen-like, they won't even be in the garbage. They will be gone. They won't exist. We don't need to put them somewhere. They're going to be gone completely. God says, I'm removing it all. It will no longer exist. So what's to be left? If all of our insecurities and stresses and frustrations and negative traits that we haven't worked through, if they're all gone, what's left? What's left is our good. What's left is our godly. In each of us, the essence of God, which is my essence, is going to shine, not just through my soul, but through my body. So then the real truth, the inner reality that most of us are not aware of, is going to be apparent. It's not going to be apparent to me. It's going to be apparent to all of creation. That's what's going to happen automatically. And now my job is to work on it. Even though you say, well, what's the point of working and doing a little bit of work when Mashiach's going to come and boom, zap? Because it's very precious to God, every little bit of our own efforts. So bit by bit, I want to try to take away those layers. I want to access and look at myself a certain way. I want to absorb a certain vision of myself. Now, of course, it's not the vision that the world is telling me. I live in America. Nobody in America is giving me any information like that, any vibes in that direction, not just to me, not to anyone. But this is God's truth. And we seriously feel different when we try to absorb this truth. We try to breathe. You can look in the mirror if that helps. You don't have to. Just breathe in this truth that I am innately special. The purpose of creation. The reason for it all. I'm God's child. I'm the queen. You might think of it as the princess. And there's a reason I'm here. There's a reason the world's here. And from God's perspective of me, I'm the epicenter of it all. Now, God's perspective of you, you're the epicenter of it all. How could that both be true? I'm not God. I'm finite. So in a finite reality, you got one center. In an infinite reality, every single one of us is the epicenter of creation. That's the reality that I'm not aware of, but is absolutely the truth of my existence. Any questions, any thoughts on any of this before I go on? So if we absorb this vision of self, then literally how we act will be different. Not consciously different, not like, oh, I should be more regal. I should be more graceful. I should be more dignified. It's not like I consciously think of it. Like going back to that story I started with of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's wife, Rebbe Chaim Mushka. I highly doubt she was sitting there thinking, I have to make a good show. I have to act a certain way. I should modulate my voice a certain way. She was being herself. But because that vision was so strong in her, that's how she acts. And it was obvious enough that everyone else in the room picked it up as well. So when that's my self-vision, I act a little different. I don't allow myself certain behaviors. There's an expression in Yiddish, passt nicht, which you translate to English, but just isn't as good as in the original, which means it's not appropriate. It doesn't work for me. Not my reality. Maybe it was my reality when I was younger and clueless, but it's not my reality. It's not appropriate for me. I wouldn't behave that way. I wouldn't talk that way. I wouldn't use those words. I wouldn't use that slang. I wouldn't raise my voice so quickly. I wouldn't lose it so fast. It's not appropriate for me. Not appropriate for God's only child, for whom this entire creation is happening. So it's a real change of self when you really, really, really just try to breathe it in, especially in moments when you don't really feel it. But it's good to breathe it in also in the other moments. Breathe in this vision of self. And that, of course, ties in a lot to the idea of Torah's premise, Judaism's perspective on a Jewish woman, which is natural refinement and modesty, right? The verse says, Kol kavod bas melech pnima, the honor of the princess, of the daughter of the king, is inward, not in the flashy, ostentatious displays. Her beauty should be very within, right? Like we've mentioned, the royal family having weights on their skirts because we don't want the skirts to go up in the wind. That's pastish. That's not appropriate for royalty. So when you look at yourself that way, it's not like, oh, and I also have this other thing. I have the whole huge checklist from God on how I'm supposed to dress, besides how I'm supposed to look at myself. I also need to do a lot of things for him, and one of which is this long list of can't wear like this, and can't wear like this, then have to cover this, then have to cover this, and it's another burden on my plate. But when we really absorb that message of how we truly are to God, and we really look at ourselves, try to look at ourselves, because we probably can never get it to the real degree, because however much we try to tell ourselves we're the epicenter, and tell ourselves we're the purpose of creation, and tell ourselves we're God's only child, certain level you don't really believe it. I'm sure all of you on a certain level don't really believe what I'm saying. Like, I mean, I'm not making it up. It's all from the sources. It's what Torah says, but still, it's hard to completely believe you're the purpose of creation. But the more you believe it, the more you breathe it in, the more you work on really looking at yourself a certain way, the more you're naturally a very modest person. Because that would be the natural outcome. The natural outcome of knowing your stature is to demand from yourself a certain dignity, a certain refinement in the words you use, in your tone of voice, in the colors and materials you choose, in the cuts of the clothing, in the thoughts you think. You would naturally demand from yourself to behave a certain way the more you have this queen within. It sort of goes in both directions. Like, if you didn't feel it at all, but you just acted the part very well, it would change your inner reality. And the more you work on thinking about it and like realigning yourself with those words of Torah, with how God looks at you, the more it would express itself outwardly. So your outward truth is going to change and cultivate your inner world, and your inner truth is going to naturally flow outward. So it's very different shift than how we normally look at ourselves, but it really is God's vision of us. And it's really a beautiful vision. Imagine giving this as a gift to your children. Imagine that your children look at themselves that way. And imagine if you look at yourself that way. And imagine if you look at other people in your world that way. It's a different world. It's a very messianic world, actually. Any thoughts, any questions, any comments on any of this? Okay, so what I wanted to do was look at a few women in history, women in the scriptures in Tanakh. And I mean, not too many. I mean, you could go on and on and on, obviously. This isn't a class on like, the women of the Bible, so to speak. But because we're talking about women and because we're talking about this person who is the epicenter of creation and who is viewing themselves that way, to really see how it played out in history. So I have a few examples. Obviously, there's myriads. When I was thinking of which woman to choose, the first woman obvious in my head was the first woman, Chava, Eve, because she was the first woman. So if we're going to look for the prototype woman, there's no woman who's more the prototype woman than Chava. She is literally the mother of all humanity. Every single human on this world, all 8 billion of us, we all come from her. So she is literally the woman of the world who has a very bad rap. I mean, her husband also has a very bad rap, which means that a lot of people, a lot of the world has no clue of their stature at all. Meaning Adam, Chava is called Eve. I assume Eve is probably some Greek translation or Latin, but I don't know Greek or Latin. I'm sure that's the roots if I looked it up. Why is Chava called Chava? Because she is referred to as Aim Kol Chai, which means the mother of all living, which is exactly what she is, the mother of all humanity forever. So Chai, life, if you're conjugating it, became Chava, the mother of all life. That's her name. That's her essence. She is the prototype mother, the prototype woman. So what do I mean by a bad rap? What I mean by a bad rap is that most of the world, including the biblically believing world, the God-believing world, the Christian world for sure, the Jewish world, even a lot of the religious Jewish world, probably look at Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, as like, I don't know, people that messed up and ruined it for the rest of us. I don't know if that's exactly, but something along those lines.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, great. You see, here we have in the class. And I'm sure maybe others, you could vote with your thumbs. Yes, you could show me. You also viewed them sort of like that. You know, they messed up and humanity's been suffering for the past 5,781 years ever since.
I'm saying when you give birth, that's the first thing you think of. Like,
oh, really?
And that's what I think. I'm like,
why'd
you mess up like that? It's the first thing I think of. I'm like,
cute.
So mad at her. Tell me something nice.
That is very, very cute. Anyone else ever had that feeling like, Chava, this is all your fault? Shira, I think you're alone. No one else is saying yes. I don't know. I never thought of it that way. But yes, that is what it says.
I used to when I was a kid, like when I was on my period.
Oh, okay.
But not give.
Yeah. But when you gave birth, you didn't connect it.
No, I mean, I enjoyed giving birth. I'm a weirdo.
Okay. No, not weirdo at all. It's one of the most godly moments you will ever experience. Bringing life into this world is such a godly moment, which a lot of people have a lot of pain with, so it's hard to appreciate as a godly moment. Maybe it's like once you first have that baby out, then it's like, you can really sense that you partnering with God. It's a supremely godly moment of your life. But it's also supremely painful for many, many, many people. So I totally get both things. And of course, it's not just the idea of having children, because every woman is that prototype Chava. Every single woman. So Chava's energy is not only limited to childbirth, which is not a limitation at all, but to being the woman we're talking about. And that's really embedded in every one of us. So what happened with Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava? I said that they have a bad rap that are not understood because Adam was the second holiest soul of all times. And Chava was his partner, so she's right there with him. Literally, we are told that the holiest soul of all times, no surprise, is the soul of Mashiach, the Messiah, the Redeemer. That's not surprising. The second holiest soul of all times, cosmically, was Adam's. That might be a surprise. Now, maybe not. It makes sense. He's the first man, prototype, handiwork of God, as we're told. But we think, yeah, they messed up. So obviously, everything has literal truth and many, many, many deeper levels as well. And they all work together. There's no such thing as a irreconcilable conflict between the commentaries. Every true commentary is true. And they all work together. Now, we might not have the brains to understand how they all work together because our minds might be too small, but that doesn't take away the truth. If it's true, and if there's another commentary, and there's another commentary, they all happen. They all are myriad levels of the same reality. Sort of like, simple example, if I'm in my house And suddenly there's unexpected guests. I totally was not expecting like people I would want to, make a nice impression on. But it was like Sunday afternoon in my house, okay? Plus I have my grandchildren here, which I do now. And suddenly, knock, knock, knock. And who's at the door? Oh my gosh. So what do I say quickly? Oh, Musya, we have guests. What do I mean? Musya, quick, take everything and like put it in a closet and close the door. But I don't say that. I say, oh, Musya, we have guests. So if somebody was giving over a report on this very significant thing going on in my life and times, because I'm the epicenter, so it's important. One reporter could say, oh, and when these guests knocked on the door and Mrs. Turn opened the door and she said, oh, Musya, we have guests. So nice and welcoming. Another reporter says, oh, and when the guest came, Mrs. Turn looks, panics, and then tells her daughter to quickly clean everything up. Which is true? They're both true. They both happened. So I just made like a little, silly little example that we could understand that there are many, many levels going on in scriptures and Tanakh, and they all happen concurrently. They're all part of the truth. There's actually, it says that the founder of the Chabad Hasidic movement, who's referred to as the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, at one point, he wrote a commentary on Torah in which he reconciled all of the seeming conflicts between the three major commentaries on Torah, between Rashi, Nachmanides, and the Ibn Ezra, the three most prominent commentators on Torah. And verse by verse, he gave a commentary that synthesized and reconciled all three, showing how they all work together. This was a major work. After he finished the work, when he was about to publish it, one night he had a dream. When he was sleeping, I don't know if it was a dream, but he was sleeping, so we'll call it a dream. And these three great sages came to him and they had a complaint. They said, not fair. If you publish your work, no one's going to study us anymore. It says that when we study the work of a sage who has departed, his lips are moving in the grave, meaning we're vivifying him because we're giving him life by our studying his words. So if you publish your words, why would anyone study Rashi? Why would anyone study Nachmanides? Why would anyone study Ibn Ezra? They're going to study you and get all three of us in our ultimate form. Not fair. And he woke up the next morning and he burnt it. So we don't have that work. He burnt it. But the point is, he wrote such a work. So they really do all work together. We just don't understand it always. So why am I giving you that background? Because I want to explain that Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, were very misunderstood and viewed as like, I don't know, people that just like messed up day one of creation and messed it up for all of us. That's a very superficial reading. Understand, they were the holiest souls besides of the Redeemer Mashiach himself. And they weren't hungry. They were in a garden full of fruits. They were just created that day. And they knew in 3 hours, the Sabbath, Shabbos was coming. And once the Sabbath, Shabbos comes, they were allowed to eat from this fruit. So why did they do it? So there's many deep answers. And one of them that I want to share today in terms of our theme is it says that Chava, at least of course it started with the woman, that Chava, that Eve understood that in 3 hours the Mashiach, the redemption was coming, which is true. In 3 hours they were going to eat from the trees, from both trees actually, live forever and have the redemption. But have the redemption in the garden. That's where the redemption was occurring. And there's a whole world outside that garden. That's outside the redemption. She's like, no, that's not the point. God wants the redemption to be in the entire world. And with that premise in mind, she ate and got Adam to eat, to be driven out of the garden, to have an opportunity to transform the whole world and make it God's garden. Now, we're not on the level to agree or disagree with her choice. And obviously there's, again, much, much more I could say about it, except that's not the focus. I'm just bringing this in as an example of someone viewing themselves, as of course was very obvious at that point, as the epicenter of creation, as the queen, as a person making pivotal choices that affect the entire world, and really sincerely trying to bring the entire world to an awareness of God, not just to my little garden, my little sequestered corner, my little room. But I have a responsibility, every one of us. Again, she's the prototype. Every one of us is from her image, in a sense, which means every one of us from this original matriarch have it in our blood. This self-sacrifice for redemption, this self-sacrifice for the world, this self-sacrifice because everyone deserves a relationship with God. The whole world deserves a relationship with God. Really outward bound thinking, other-centered thinking, that because I'm the center, so what I'm doing really affects. That was Chava. Any questions on that before I move on to my next candidate of choice here?
Yeah, where does the snake come in then?
So if you would view the snake in that way, you would say that was the force that inspired her to think along these lines. Now, of course, the snake was absolutely evil. Prior to the sin, the world was very different prior to the sin, which means the world was basically white and the snake was black. Post the sin, we have gray. We've integrated inside ourselves this angel. Every one of us has an angel inside of us that's called an evil inclination. That's an angel. God gave it a mission to tempt me. So the snake also works for God, meaning in the, I would compare it just for the purpose of clarity. It's not a real comparison because it's not all equal. But if you look at like any other religion, Christianity is one we probably know the best, there's like two forces in the world, good versus evil. And this world is sort of the conflict between the two. And of course, we are rooting for the side of good, but there is a side of evil and it has a lot of power. That's not our version of the world. That's not our version of the story. There are no two forces in this world. There's one force, God. The whole world is God. Prior to creation, there was only God. Post-creation, there's only God. Seems like a lot of other stuff going on. It's all manifestations of him. So the Jew is a manifestation of God. My pen is a manifestation of God. And the snake was a manifestation of God, meaning he was a godly energy that had a mission. Just as my evil inclination is a godly energy, an angel that has a mission. His mission was to tempt Chava, to put these thoughts in her head. Obviously, it was a sin, but obviously it was a sin that God wanted. In essence, if we would just be a little more philosophical here for a second, every time we sin, it's a sin God wants. How do I know it's a sin he wants? Because he's allowing it to happen. God runs the world. If he didn't want me to sin in the way I'm choosing now to sin, he just wouldn't make it possible. He could, change very quickly whatever's going on and shift me away from that sin. Sometimes he does. Maybe some of you have experienced it where you're about to do something significantly wrong and it doesn't work out. God didn't let. Why didn't God let? Because it wouldn't be beneficial. It's not part of his plan. So he's not letting. So anything that does work out, anything wrong that works out, which is sort of a strange way to put it, but anything wrong that works out, God says, okay, yeah, I could go with that. Why would he go with that? Why would he let that happen? Because he knows that every step we take away from him, as long as he's still, watching to make sure it's the right steps, is ultimately a step that's going to bring us that much closer and going to transform the energy of those things we sinned with. If I would eat something not kosher, and then I realize, oh my gosh, what did I just do? And I repent and I return to God. I sincerely repent. The ultimate close repentance to God. It's not just that I came back, and it's not just that I came back closer, because if I was holding in a space where I would do that, I obviously wasn't caring that much about him at the time. And then when I repented, I really started caring about him and realizing, what am I doing to myself? So obviously I grew closer, but I also released the energy of those foods. Those foods I ate actually are also part now of my journey of bringing close to God. So when a person sins, there's an opportunity to come closer to God through this process, which is why God allows it. But some sins we're not going to come closer through. They'll push us over the edge. And those God never allows. So with the snake and with Chava's choice, which was a wrong choice,
What are those
but
sins?
a godly choice, could something be wrong and godly? That sounds like an oxymoron. It was a wrong choice officially. It was a sin. It was unpleasant. God punished her and mankind. And it was a godly choice. So with a wrong godly choice, God's plot for creation is now moved to the next level. Firma, did you have a question? I cut you off because I kept talking.
Yeah, no, it's okay. What are those sins that you were talking about that wouldn't make it easier to be closer to God?
For each person, it's different. But if any of you, have you ever experienced it? I mean, anyone out there, I haven't personally experienced it, but I've seen it with some people in my life, that you really have an intention to do something wrong, but God just didn't let it, didn't work out. Like you had this whole plot, but God's cut it off. He didn't let you do that wrong thing. I don't know if any of you have experienced it, but I've definitely seen it.
I mean,
I feel like
who plans that? Who planned like to go sin? If anything, you plan to do what's right. You're not going to go plan to go against God on purpose.
It depends where you're holding. Depends what's going on in your life. People can plan to do something wrong. Let's say someone's planning a whole tryst with someone, but God just doesn't let it happen. Like your car died, your phone died. There's no Ubers that are responding to your call. The other person's phone died. Like it doesn't happen. It was supposed to happen, but it didn't happen. Why not? Because God says, not going to be good for you. From this, I don't see that return journey so easy. I'm not letting you do it. Well, why let me do a million other things that were wrong? Because each one of those, I saw your return, but this one, it would push you over the edge. Simcha?
It doesn't have to be a big avera. You put, yeah, it does. I don't have a question. I said you don't have to be a big avera. It could be, let's say, lashon hara, that you want to speak about someone lashon hara, and then you self. This is also called that Hashem doesn't want you to talk about her or something that would harm her through lashon hara. You're not planning. It's just you just wanted to speak lashon hara,
and God didn't let.
Yeah. That's
exactly. Perfect example. Now, what you're saying, Simcha, is coming from a different but perfect example of my point. What Simcha said, I'm just going to repeat it because I know for me it was a little difficult, hearing you, but I understood your point very well. It was a very wise point. What Simcha's saying is, let's say you, again, it wasn't like a long-range 3-day plan. Just you heard something about someone else, and being you, you want to share it. Like, oh my gosh, I have to. I don't know why. I don't know why people are wired that way. Why are we all wired that way? Why do you need to share it? I don't know. But you want to share it. Like, it's so like, oh my gosh. And God doesn't let it work. He doesn't allow you to share it. Why not? Well, she said, Simcha's version, maybe that would be so damaging for that person. God said, no, that damage isn't supposed to happen. I'm not letting it. Absolutely correct. Now, that wasn't the same point I was coming from, but it's exactly bringing out the same point. The point being, we make free choices and God runs the world. Well, if we make free choices, how does God run the world? Or if God runs the world, why do I sin? Right? Those two seem contradictory. If God runs the world, why would I sin? I mean, it's God's world. How could I ever sin? Or conversely, if I'm the free player here and I'm sinning or doing right or doing wrong, then he's not running the world. I'm making choices that are affecting his world. So the answer is no. It's a little bigger than we can conceptualize probably. It takes a lot of maybe background information that we're not really going into, but it just sort of is like understanding God's a lot bigger than us. In many other religions, if you want to use that term, their vision of God is man bigger, man wiser, man more powerful, man more omnipotent, but they take man and they just make him bigger, and that's God. That's not God. God is God. And in essence, he is infinite in a way that we can never fathom. Just as I said, every one of us literally is the purpose of creation. So I'm the purpose of creation, and I'm in that traffic jam because I'm supposed to be late. But you're also driving the same road. So are you supposed to be late, or am I supposed to be late? Or we're both supposed to be late. How does it work? Leave it to God. He can handle both of our realities. So similarly, God structured every human, every Jew has free choice. Of everything in our life? No, not of everything in our life. Of everything that has to do with serving God. Every non-Jew has free choice, and everything in their life that has to do with serving God. And our free choice never contradicts, never changes one iota of God's master plan. My free choice and God's plan always works together. And I'm giving here this just very simple example because I was responding to the question about Chava and the snake, which was a very intelligent question. To say, and I was just giving like a little example to try to respond to it, to say, here, I'm making a choice to sin. But God's involved in my sin, meaning he's allowing me to sin as long as it works within his plan. And if it didn't work within his plan for whatever reason, as I said, maybe it will push me over the edge and I wouldn't come closer. As Simcha said, maybe it will cause harm to someone that's not supposed to be harmed that way. God won't let it happen. Well, what do you mean? If you want to gossip, you're going to gossip. God's not going to have anyone answer their phone. God's going to make your phone die. God's going to distract you with 5 other things. By the time you remember, it's old news. You know, something happened to you and someone said something about you and you suddenly were abashed and ashamed to think you would say something about anyone else.
So then in reality, it's not free choice.
It is free choice, but God's watching and he is, if you will, monitoring it. In other words, there's a lot of choices people make that are not, I'll give you like a little simple example. It's not exactly the same, but if you would have 3 children and you're giving each of them $5, nowadays probably give them $20, but whatever. And you say to a friend, you say to your mother, Mom, I have divine spirit. This kid's putting it in his bank account. This kid's going to the dollar store, and this kid's giving it to the next person in need. And each of them do that. You in no way created those choices for your children, but you know your children and you know what they're going to do. Now let's take it a step further. Let's say, you know, this kid's going to the dollar store. This kid's going to give it away because somebody's gonna probably come knocking on your door. And this kid's gonna buy something not good for himself with that money. Whatever a child's gonna buy with money, you know, it's not good for him. So you're like, I had to give each one of them that money. And they are free, you know, they are freely allowed to do whatever they want with it. But I've got to change the situation so he can't make that choice. I've got to make it not possible. I can't take away from him the ability to do whatever he wants with his money, but I've got to change the situation so he doesn't make that bad choice. You know, if in your house, people are allowed to have friends over, but you know, this friend isn't healthy for your child, you can't say you're not allowed to have a friend over. You can't say you're not allowed to invite that child. But I've got to change the situation so it doesn't work out. You're not taking away his free choice, but you are behind the scenes making the situation so it doesn't work out. Am I taking away his free choice? I'm not taking away his free choice, but I am doing certain things to protect him from the range of his choices. So don't worry. There are many times God lets you mess up freely, but sometimes God says, I got to protect you from yourself. He's not taking your ability to freely choose, but he's going to change the situation so you're not going to choose things that are too damaging. Any other questions on this? We somehow got into this, but it's our life, it's our reality. And it definitely ties back into our theme of me as the queen, me as the mover and shaker, me as the epicenter. So I want to bring a different example, totally different idea, but also just showing our real power, the real power we each have. So I want to focus for a minute, we'll shine the limelight on Leah. You know, of our 4 matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. So it says about Leah, when the verse is describing her, it says that Rachel was very, very beautiful, and Leah's eyes were very soft. And there's various commentators, but the main thrust of the commentary is her eyes were sort of bloodshot, soft from years and years and years of crying. Why was she crying for so many years? Because she was praying to God. What had she heard since she was little? You know, as people talk, it's not just nowadays, you don't just need social media for it. It always went on. So the word on the street was, oh, perfect. Rebecca has 2 sons. Her brother, Lavan, has 2 daughters. Perfect shidduch, perfect match. The older son's going to get the older daughter. Esav to Leah. The younger son is going to get the younger daughter, Yaakov, Jacob, to Rachel, to Rachel. Sorry, I see. Sorry. And everybody was saying this. So she grew up hearing she was destined to marry this arch villain, this horrifically evil person, Esav. And the truth is, people were right. That was at a certain level God's design. In a certain spiritual level, she was destined to Esav. And what did she do? She spent years of her life crying. She spent years of her life praying to God to change this decree. And what happened? It changed. And instead of marrying Esav, she was the first wife of Jacob, of Yaakov. She was the mother of the Jewish people. She gave birth to 6 out of the 12 tribes. So her prayers literally changed her from being the wife of Esav, this horrifically evil person, to being the mother of the Jewish people and the wife of Jacob, of Yaakov. So I think that's in a different way, sort of the same point, because she didn't feel like, okay, I mean, I hope it doesn't happen, but if it happens, it happens. What can I do about it? What can I do about these things? She said, I can do something, and I'm going to do something. I'm going to turn to God. And she did. And she turned to God for years. For years, she turned to God with this prayer that she should not be the wife of Esav. And her prayers changed the decree. We're told that our prayers are more powerful than the blessing of a godly person, of a tzaddik. Because even the most ultimately godly person can only draw down the good that's written for us that maybe didn't come down because of things blocking the channels. But he can't create something that's not there. But our prayers can. Our prayers can change not just our reality, what's scripted.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
How do we know what's scripted though? Usually we start praying when we are already in that situation. No, none of us are looking ahead saying, in the future, my kids may marry someone who is not good for them. We don't see that.
Well, so you're saying you don't have as many years head notice as Leah had?
Yeah.
Sometimes when we look at our children, we can sort of see, I mean, if we're talking specifically about our children, it could be about anything in your life, you can see tendencies, you can see patterns. We pray, I know you give charity for your children every single day. So every single day, you're turning to God, you're saying your child's chapter of Psalms of Tehillim every day. Why? The kid's 5 and he's fine today. Why are you still today giving that charity and saying that Psalm? Because who knows what's going to be in his life? Who knows what he's going to need? Who knows what your charity and Psalms are doing for him? And I hope we all do that every day. Not just for your children, for anyone in your world that you're caring about. There's a lot of things that people need that we, like she was saying, might not know, but we know some of the stuff out there. We know some of our impending fears for this person that's very close to us, for this person who's going through something, or for this person who we see a tendency or a pattern that there might be a problem in the future. It hasn't happened yet, but we see a weakness of character, or we see a certain pattern in the choices they make, that we're turning to God to help, that it should work out. And we're trusting God that it will. So we might not have as well the inside scoop. And again, it doesn't seem from the commentators, though it could have been. I mean, Leah was a very, 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 very godly woman. So it could be that she didn't just hear it on the street corners. She knew it as a godly truth. That could be. Or it could just be that this is what she picked up was probably going to happen to her. You know, marriages were definitely arranged in those days and for thousands of years after. But it could be just in our own life, if we look at ourselves, and again, talking about ourselves personally in terms of this, saying, you know, I know things I'm going to need. I don't know what's scripted. I don't know if this is what God has in mind, but I know the help I need, that it might be today or it might be in the future. And I'm already turning to God and praying. Now, obviously, Shira is right. Very often for myself, especially like on like significant days, like the high holidays, where your year is sort of being charted out. Definitely, in addition to my list, I say to God to give me what I'm not wise enough to ask for, but I need. Because obviously we don't know. I mean, none of us knew about Corona when we were praying the high holidays a year ago. Well, at this point, a year and a half ago plus. So we didn't know to ask for whatever we would need of protection or health or whatever. So God, you have to take our prayers. Sometimes I feel like, God, you have to take my merits, take our virtues, take the godliness we're creating and put them in the right places. And he does, meaning every good thing you do creates a merit, creates a godly energy. Every wrong thing you do also creates an energy, but we're going to talk now on the positive side. They don't wash each other out. It's not like a scorecard where you got 5 checks and 3 X's. So in the end, you wind up with 2 checks. It doesn't work like that at all. You have your 5 checks, you have your 3 X's, and both of those energies are happening. So we're looking at the check side. Every godly thing you do creates an energy, creates a godliness, creates a flow, creates a blessing, however what word you're going to use for it. And sometimes you are totally clueless what you really need, the salvation you need. But God is very clued in. So he can take that energy you created by your good deeds and put it, maybe you weren't thinking anything, or maybe you were thinking something very specific. And God says, no. I'm not putting it there. I'm putting it where you really need it. At one point in this class, I remember in this class, we shared the story that came out sort of post-ish Corona about that couple whose wedding was ruined because someone reported on them to the police. And very begrudgingly, after a lot of very deep efforts, the woman forgave the man who ruined her wedding. Remember the story? Anyone remember it?
Yeah.
I'm saying it very briefly because it's a very strong story, so I'm assuming you remember it. And then, like right after that, she and her husband were in what should have been a fatal car crash. But they walked away, which they attributed to their selflessly forgiving this person that ruined their wedding. Sorry if you missed the story because it probably doesn't make much sense. But if you remember the story, you probably know what I'm talking about. So when they forgave this man who ruined their wedding, they weren't thinking, God, there's probably gonna be a car crash that's about to happen. And this should be a big enough merit to save us. They didn't know they were gonna have a car crash. They weren't praying to be saved from the car crash. They weren't praying that anything good should happen from what they were doing. They just sort of did what they know you're supposed to do and forgave the person. But they created an enormous light from that. And God put it in the right place. God put it where it was needed. So we don't always know what to pray for. That's true. We don't always know what's impending. But as we do our part, God's on our side. And he's going to take the energy we're creating and help that it should go to the right places. But we could also at the same time sometimes turn to God, not exactly knowing, but with sort of like a sense of asking for protection, asking for help, asking for blessings, asking for things to work out, even if we don't know the exact details, but we know help's needed. But what I thought was so powerful in this example of Leah, going back to this vision of the epicenter, me, the queen, God's only child, is the power here, the enormous power that we possess. Truly a power to say, I've got to make a change here. And her prayers changed reality. And our prayers as well. We have that ability as well. So that's also, to me, that very much feeds into this vision of me as royal, of me as a leader, a power, a reason for creation, that we can really look at things that aren't good in our world, don't seem to be good, and pray or do good deeds or give charity or say psalms and make things change. I see it's late, I'll sort of wrap up just 2 more examples quickly. The women of Egypt. It says that the women of Egypt, of whom we are the reincarnation, the Arizal, the second most noted Kabbalist of all times, the most noted Kabbalist of all times is Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. The second most noted Kabbalist of all times is the Arizal. And he writes, or his teaching is recorded, that the generation left Egypt will be resurrected to be the generation of the times of the redemption, the generation that brings redemption, which according to most rabbis today is our generation. So we are those women. But talking about those women who happen to be us, our ancestors and us, the women of Egypt were the ones that brought redemption to Egypt. It wasn't just the entire Jewish people. It wasn't Moses, it wasn't Moshe. It was either the Jewish women, as our sages say, in the merit of the righteous women of Egypt, the entire 3 million Jews left Egypt. Or as our sages say, the Redeemer was, we want to focus the limelight on one person, was Miriam, Moses' older sister, 6 years older. She was the Redeemer. Well, Moses was the one leading the Jews out with the staff and the 10 plagues. That's true. But Miriam inspired the women that they became the redemptive force that brought the entire Jewish people out. They were the queens. They possessed and used their power. As it says that Miriam, to explain the story a little, that when Miriam was very young, at this point the Egyptians were killing any babies born or any male babies born. And they allowed the girls to live, but they killed the boys because they knew that a boy was going to be born who would be the Redeemer. And so her father, who was a leader of the Jewish people, Amram, separated from his wife, Yocheved, and then all the Jewish men separated from their wives, following their leader's suit. And little Miriam, she was, 4.5, 5 at the time, had prophecy. Literally, she had a prophetic spirit. Not her father, who was the leader of the Jews. She was given literally prophecy by God that her mother would have a baby and he would redeem the Jewish people. And she went to her father and she told him her prophecy. And her father believed her and accepted it and remarried his wife Yocheved, and Moshe was born, who went on to be the Redeemer. So here she is, she's a small child, and he's born, she's like 5.5. And she knows her brother's a Redeemer. That's why she went to check out what was happening when he was put in a basket in the Nile. Anyway, what happens to Moses? Well, he spends 40 years in the palace, and then he has to run away, as you know the details of the story, and for 40 years he's gone. And here she is, from like age 5.5, right, that when she got the prophecy, she was about 4.5. And she knows her brother is going to be born and he's going to redeem the Jewish people. And she saw it happen. And miraculously, he was born circumcised, he was born, and the house was full of life. And when he got put in the Nile, the princess of Paro, Basia, pulls him out, and then her whole arm extends to pull him out. She saw all the miracles. But then what happened? The Jews are still in Egypt. And it only got worse. The 86 years of Miriam's life were the worst years of the subjugation and enslavement in Egypt. Meaning the Jews were enslaved for about 113 years, but the harshest slavery were those last 86 years. The years she was living through. And she knew that we're supposed to have redemption. So she so much believed in the prophecy. I mean, she got the prophecy and she saw it playing out that she had such pain from the horrors that were going on and such conviction it was going to be different. And this she infused in all the women. So all the women believed that redemption was coming, which means they felt enormous pain by what they were going through. If you don't believe it's going to get better, it doesn't hurt you as much what's going on because you sort of like resign yourself to it. You numb your feelings a little. If someone's married to someone who has certain issues that you don't feel will ever change, and you're not planning on leaving the marriage, you just accept that that's life going to be like, which means a certain bit of you just doesn't let yourself feel, resigns, moves on, and don't let yourself think about it. So if you think the status quo is the status quo, you're not in as much pain as someone that says, no, it's not supposed to be like this. Life is not supposed to be like this. So Miriam's conviction, which infused all the women to say, life isn't supposed to be like this. We're supposed to be redeemed. We don't know where that Redeemer is, but we know we're supposed to be redeemed. So we don't accept this, which means we're in enormous pain. So they had enormous belief and enormous pain, but enormous belief. And because of that belief, God redeemed them. And that's why when they left Egypt, as they were loading up their donkeys with all their possessions, the women threw in musical instruments. They took out tambourines, they took out drums, because they said, this isn't the end of the story. Egypt is still so powerful. We know God's going to destroy it, and we're ready to celebrate. So when a week later, God destroyed the strength of Egypt through the miracle by the sea, the men sang and the women sang. But the women sang with musical instruments. The men didn't have any, because they knew that God was going to do something more, because they had such belief. It says they don't only sang, they danced. The men sang, which is nice, but the women danced because it was a whole body experience, because they were in such pain over this craziness called exile, slavery, torture. The degree of their pain was the degree of their joy. So they had much more pain than the men, much more belief than the men, which is why they had more pain, and much more joy by that ultimate redemption by the splitting of the sea, which is why they had the musical instruments, which is why they danced. So these women were the queens, which again, we are those women. As the Arizal says, we're a reincarnation of those women. They were queens. They were the movers and shakers. They weren't just letting it happen. They were changing history. They were that powerful. They viewed themselves as that powerful, and they made differences. And that's really what each one of us can do as well. That's really our power. It's late. I'm going to do one more woman really quickly, and then we'll end at this point. And if anyone has to get off, it's totally understandable. The final woman that I thought of was Ruth. Ruth, who is, I just thought to end on her because she, prototype convert, really is also that woman, that queen, that freely chose God in a way that made absolutely no sense. She, I mean, I don't know, you probably all know her story, but just in case you don't, I'll say it briefly. Ruth was a Moabite princess. Her father was the king of Moab. Moab was traditionally the enemies of the Jewish people at that time. Nowadays, they just got mixed up among the nations, so we can't point to anyone as a Moabite, but in those days it was a real nation. And at that time, a very autocratic and enormously wealthy Jewish family actually left Israel and came to Moab, because there was this horrific famine going on in Israel, and the family did the wrong thing and abandoned their brothers. Not going to go into the whole story now, I just want to focus on Ruth. So when the family comes and they're enormously wealthy, even though Moab doesn't really love the Jews, but there's a lot of money there. So Moab sort of embraced this family to the degree that the king of Moab gave two of his daughters to the two sons of this family, Machlon and Chilion, who, as Jewish men, made a stipulation of the marriage for the woman to convert, which they did and lived as Jewish women, but I don't, maybe the conversion was to get married, maybe it was sincere, we don't know. Anyway, 10 years later, God was like, no, this is completely wrong. The father, God, died even before the marriage was even arranged. 10 years later, both of these men were childless. God never gave them children in these marriages. Both of these men lost all of their money. And ultimately, after 10 years, both of these men died. So Machlon's gone, Chilion's gone, Elimelech, the father, is gone. The only one left of this family is Naomi, a very righteous woman who's been stuck in Moab for over 10 years. And she's like, I'm going home. I've got nothing here. I've got nothing at home. I'm penniless. I left very wealthy. Now I have nothing. But what am I doing in Moab? I'm always in Moab because my husband was here. And then when he died, well, my sons were here and they couldn't leave because they were married to the princesses, but they're gone. I'm leaving. And her two daughter-in-laws, Rus and Arpa, were like, we're coming with. We love you. We want to be with you. And she's like, you're crazy. What are you doing? Don't come with me. Go home. Go home. You're princesses. Go back to the palace. Your father will find you another shidduch. He'll find you a better husband, or not a better husband, a husband that you'll have children with, that you'll build a life together with. Go home. And she spoke very strongly to both of them, because again, maybe their conversion was only, well, like, who knows if their conversion was real or not. If they left her, obviously it wasn't real in the first place, so it was fine to leave. And if they stayed with her, it was real. So either way, it's okay. I'm not, it's a long conversation. I'm just trying to say this point. I'm trying to say it quickly also. But they don't 100% agree, meaning there were two women, Rus and Arpa. And Arpa was convinced, I mean, it was completely logical what her mother-in-law was saying, and she gave Naomi a big kiss and a big hug, and she went back home, and she got married to someone else, and she lived her life, and other things happened that we're not gonna talk about now. And Rus said, no, I'm crazy, I'm sticking with you. And I said, go back. I have nothing for you. I don't have any more sons for you to marry. And I don't think anyone's gonna marry you if you go to Judea. I'm an old woman. My life is at the end. You're young. I mean, she wasn't so young then. Rus was 40. But you're still young. You'll still go back. You still have a life ahead of you. And Rus said, no, I'm sticking with you, and I'm sticking with God. And she made that very, 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 very difficult, abnormal, in a sense, choice. Why? And it was really, I mean, okay, there's so many details to go into that I don't have time for, but really, it didn't seem, she's a princess, and they were so poor that she literally went out and collected the sheaves with the beggars. She didn't want her mother-in-law to have to be so degraded, so she did it for both of them. And for reasons that I don't have time to go into, she didn't think she would ever get married again. But she made that choice for God. She stuck with God. And what happened, just to very quickly, someone wants more information, continue next week. What happened is God paid her back. Every drop that we choose to do for him, he pays back bigger. God will never be indebted to us. So what happened? She eventually did marry. She not only married, she married the head of the Jewish people, whose name was Boaz. And the two of them had a child, whose name was Oved, which means a servant of God, because he was an ultimate servant of God. He had a son named Yishai, who was so perfect that our sages say the only reason he died was the bite of the snake, so to speak, primordial sin. He was that perfect. And Yishai had a son named David. And David had a son named Solomon. And from David and Solomon, ultimately come the Redeemer, come the Messiah, come Mashiach. And who's the matriarch of this whole family? Rus. That convert that made no sense to walk with her mother-in-law, Naomi, but she did. So again, she made a huge choice for God. She made the hugest sacrifice of whatever seemed like a normal, hopeful road to happiness, to a future. And she sacrificed and she put God first. And that's, again, that queen, that's that enormous power. And that power of hers, and again, beyond our time to explain all the spiritual reasons why, but that power of hers, again, she was making her choices, Boaz was making his choices, Naomi was making her choices, and God was running the script. And that power of hers led to being the mother of David, the great-grandmother of David. She lived to see it. She saw David on the throne, and she saw Solomon on the throne. So everyone was looking at her and thinking, she's crazy, so to speak. Go back to Moab, go back to the palace, get married, have a life, have a happy life. She said, God, I'm choosing you. And God said, everything you do for me, trust me. I'm paying you back in ways you'll never be able to imagine. And this was Rus, and this is the line of David, the line of Solomon, and the line of Mashiach. So we are really over time, but it's nice we did get to this point. Today is the 3rd of Tammuz, which is a day that very much connects to Lubavitcher Rebbe. whose whole life was about bringing Mashiach. So it's a nice moment to think about this and to really think about this energy of Rus and the self-sacrifice she had and the choices she made, and which are playing out till today, and which very soon we should see the complete revelation of the redemption and of the Redeemer. And knowing that Redeemer is her grandchild, is her descendant. So every one of us really has this queenly power. And again, not that I'm Chava, not that I'm Leah, not that I'm Miriam, not that I'm Rus, but each one of us is, in our way, the Chava, the Leah, the Miriam, the Rus. Each one of us really is. Each one of us has enormous power. And each one of us, when we just shift our focus and really view ourselves as the queen we are and can be, if we just let it shine, we'll make those right choices and we'll see it flow. Thank you so much for joining. And I'm so sorry that I held you so over.
Beautiful
And everybody
class.
was
Thank
so
you.
nice. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Looking forward
Great
to
class.
next week. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.